For the first time ever, Stats Canada has published data relating to housing investors, and the study found that 42% of condos in Ontario are actually owned by investors. In this video, we are going to have a look at the data that Stats Canada has released, talk a little bit about the pros and cons of all of this, and finally discuss what could be done to reduce the number of investor-owned properties across the country. If you find value in this video, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to our channel to stay up to date on real estate news in Canada. Now, the first thing we're going to look at here is a breakdown of investor-owned properties by property type. So you can see houses are in the orange, condos are in this grayish blue color. So in Ontario, 15% of houses are actually investor owned, and condos are actually 42% owned by investors in Ontario, and that's the highest out of any of the provinces across Canada. Now, 42% is obviously a very high number when we talk about investor-owned condos in the market, but what's also interesting is this gap that we see from condos to homes or detached homes, and it's pretty consistent across all of the provinces. So why do investors prefer purchasing condos compared to detached homes? Well, there's a couple of answers, and the first is purchase price. Ultimately, condos are a lower barrier to entry and they require a lower investment. So it's easier for investors to purchase condos than things like townhomes or detached homes. Secondly, condos are typically easier to maintain than detached homes. They have things like property managers that deal with a lot of things in the building, and you also pay into condo fees monthly that maintain a large portion of things in the building. And finally, it's the rentability of them. A lot of the rental market are younger people or younger couples that are just getting out on their own or maybe saving for a down payment, and condos fit that situation pretty well. And this brings us to another point. Is it all bad news that investors own 40% of the condo market in Ontario? Well, we have to think about renters as well. In Canada, over 30% of people rent where they live. So, well, these investors owning these properties are actually creating supply within the rental market. And now let's say this number was cut in half. So instead of 40% of condos owned by investors, there's only 20%. Well, hypothetically, that would take about half of the rental supply out of the market, and logically that would drive rental prices up pretty quickly. Now, where I do see a problem with this is people purchasing for themselves or getting into the market. Condos are typically seen as an entry-level purchase, and a lot of first-time home buyers are getting into condos. So by investors owning such a large portion of this, they're taking properties away from buyers that would actually be purchasing to live in them as their primary residence. Not only that, but they're definitely having an impact on price as they're taking supply out of the market. Now, talking about supply, in Canada, we have a fundamental supply issue. We simply do not have enough homes, especially when you look at the projected population growth from immigration over the next 5 years. Now, Canada is actively trying to correct the supply issue we're having by building more homes. In 2022, they actually passed a bill that's called the Build Homes Faster Act, I believe. And when it comes to more densely populated areas or densely populated cities, what they're doing is they're actually building up in a lot of scenarios. So they're building more condos. And it brings a question of who's actually going to be purchasing these condos. Well, based on the numbers we're seeing, we can assume roughly 40% of them are going to be purchased by investors. And that leaves just over half of the remaining supply for people that are actually purchasing to live in these condos. So how do we reduce the number of investor-owned properties across Canada? Well, the government has actually passed something recently that's going to deal with one portion, and that's the non-resident investors. So we're going to look at one more thing here from Stats Canada, and this is the type of investors that actually own the condos. So in Ontario, you can see that 22.5% are in-province investors. That's the highest across all of Canada. About 0.5% are out-of-province investors. That's a pretty low number when you look at the rest of the provinces. So we don't have that issue in Ontario. But this next one, non-resident investors make up 5.5% of the investors own properties in Ontario and 7% in British Columbia. And that's something that the government has dealt with already. They've announced that there's a ban on foreign buyers starting this year, and it's going to last for 2 years. So over the next 2 years, this number definitely will not go up. If anything, it will go down. So that's one thing that's being done to reduce this number of investor-owned properties, but what else can be done? Well, these are just ideas here, but since it's more condos that are owned by investors, one option would be limiting the percentage of new build or new construction projects that can actually be purchased for investors, or even giving early access or first access to people like first-time buyers or buyers that are going to actually live in the property and then releasing it to investors. Another idea I've seen thrown around, which the government loves, is more taxes for investors purchasing properties. So this could be in the form of land transfer tax, so having an additional tax for investors, or even having higher property taxes for investor-owned properties. So what do you think of all of this? Do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing that we have these levels of investor-owned properties across the country? And what do you think could be done to reduce these numbers? Let us know in the comments down below. That's it for this video. If you have any questions, let us know and we'll talk to you soon.